Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Bill Crawford. Bill started with Lawson Electric in 1986 and is now president and CEO of the company. Bill, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we find out why AC/DC is every electrician's favorite rock and roll band, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Black coffee always.
My kind of guy.
Yeah, I prefer to have black coffee starting at about 6:30 in the morning, and I usually drink it till around 10.
Wow. So how many cups you get in, 4 or 5?
Yeah, I usually fill one, drink about half of it, and it'll get cold while I'm doing something, and I move on to the next. So,
do you get up early and enjoy the quiet and a cup of coffee by yourself for a while?
I do. I get up about 5 a.m. every morning and kind of catch up on the news and just kind of take my time, try to get to the office around 7.
Yeah. Well, you're a busy guy, and you've done a great job of building Lawson Electric, and thank you for coming in and talking about your career. You grew up here, right? Born in Chattanooga?
I did. I was born in Chattanooga in 1965 and grew up just being a kid around Chattanooga back when nobody came downtown. And,
what part of town?
I actually grew up in Highland Park.
Oh, yeah?
And later went into Brainerd and eventually just kind of stayed in that side of town, East Brainerd, and enjoyed.
Well, and just from what you'd said when no one went downtown, being born in 65, there's 30 years that, people were leaving Chattanooga and definitely not going downtown. So you've seen this change quite a bit, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had a good friend, one of the Hennings that owned a club downtown. We were young. We'd get off 27 and pull up to the red light at Chestnut or Broad and look down the street while the light was red, and might see a piece of newspaper blowing down the street, but you'd never see anybody.
Yeah.
And today it's changed so much with growth and, the aquarium and all the great things that has been developed.
Well, talk a little bit about growing up in the Highland Park area. What'd you do for fun and go to high school, and kind of what were those first jobs that had an impact on you too, growing up as a teenager?
My first job, I cut the grass at an apartment complex during the summers, and for my mom worked there. And so I had a full-time job working 40 hours a week doing that.
How old were you?
I was 14.
Wow, that's formative.
Yeah. So did give me structure, and I don't remember what I made by the hour, but I got paid once every other week, and I brought home $186 for 2 weeks for 80 hours. And I bought my first car from one of my teachers.
What kind of car?
It was a 69 Chevelle Super Sport.
Oh, man. And, what was that, like a 454 engine or something? Like
396.
396?
But, I had bought it from one of my teachers that I went to Hamilton Christian Academy, and we needed a car, and I negotiated a deal with him to buy the car, and he said, well, how are you going to pay for it? Do you have the money? And I said, well, no, I don't. But I said, I'll make $186, and I'm pretty sure I can get 14 from my mom, and I'll pay you $200 every 2 weeks for the entire summer, and I paid $2,000 for the car. So that's how I got our first car, which I wasn't old enough to drive. But
so you did that when you were 14, 15?
Mm-hmm.
Because your family needed a car.
They did, yeah.
And you negotiated the deal.
I did. I do remember looking in his eyes when I was talking to him, and he was like, I can't believe this kid is wanting to buy this car that's got this big engine in it. And it wasn't anything fancy, obviously.
Yeah.
But he said, well, you better get your mom in the next conversation because we got to make sure that's okay.
Yeah.
But as it went, bought the car. My mom drove it for, 4 or 5 years.
Do you have any siblings?
I have one sister. She is about 3.5 years older than me.
So at that age, 14's young to be working, 40 hours a week. I mean, granted in the summer, but also negotiating a car and buying a car for your family. Pressure on you to be the man of the house.
Well, I never thought about it that way. I guess I knew there was a need, and that was how I was going to do my part.
And probably internal pressure. I'm not saying from your mom.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I just didn't think that much of it. I wanted a car, and I think all young kids want a car, and that was a way to achieve two goals, helping my mom out and get the car.
You wish you had that Chevelle today.
I do. I have looked for it before. So
have you? Those are great cars.
I have a weakness with cars. I've owned quite a few cars. And
what's your favorite?
I've got a 69 Z28.
Oh wow!
That's all factory, and I've got a 33 Ford Coupe. It's a street rod, and I've got a 71 Ford Bronco half cab. So I'm fairly diverse in what I like. But
I bet a lot of people would like to get hold of that Bronco.
The Bronco's a funny story. I've owned 14 of them, and that was the first one I bought. Every time I'd pass one on the road, they weren't bringing any money, so you could buy one for $1,500.
Yeah.
And if I passed one that had something on it mine didn't have, I'd buy it, and I'd make whatever repairs that needed to be made, and I'll swap parts for what I wanted, and then I'd sell it, maybe make $500. So it was something to do on the weekends, keep me out of trouble. And so I still own that same Bronco.
Oh, that's very cool. And obviously the podcast is not about cars, but I find a big interest in it. But back to being a teenager and you're cutting you're cutting an apartment complex. That had to take you a good amount of time to do that.
Yeah, it was Monday morning at 8 a.m. I'd start on one end, and it would take me till Friday at
would it really
4:30 to finish. By the time I mowed and weeded and swept, and
so that's what you did all week. It was just a different portion of it every day. So, and any other jobs in high school or before you?
Some in the winter. I had a job at Pruitt's grocery store in East Ridge. I worked in the produce department there, and my dad had a little business where he did additions and remodels on houses, and I would help him with that. So,
what did those things teach you as a kid growing up?
Well, I mean, it taught me that really once I became an adult, I needed to figure out what it is I wanted to do, and it also gave me a better understanding of, everything costs something, so you have to have a way to pay for it. So if you have an expectation to have things, you need to have an expectation that you're going to need to work and earn your money.
Well, and related to that, and we were talking a little bit earlier, there's that everything has a cost, but that expectation, and when you and I were growing up, there was a big expectation to go to a 4-year college, but there's also a cost with that. And you ended up going to Chattanooga State, correct?
I did. When I got out of high school, went over to Chattanooga State and enrolled in the industrial electricity class. Had an instructor over there named Larry Dillard, and he was a very interesting guy, made it fun, learned a lot from him. And I went through that program and, worked my jobs and was fortunate enough to take what I had learned there and got a job in the summers working for an electrical contractor.
So as a kid, was electrical work or electricity a thing of big interest, or was it when you got to Chat State said, this seems like it might be a pretty good path for me?
Well, I guess it started in middle school. Everybody, the guys would say, what are you going to do? And back then there was Kirkman Technical High School downtown, which is, where the almost the aquarium and the IMAX is. And, some people were doing HVAC, some people were doing electricity. And when I worked at that apartment complex in the summers, I would sometimes help do the repairs to the air conditioning units or change light fixtures or something like that. So I think I was still trying to figure out the path that I wanted, but I quickly transitioned into the electrical side of things. when I thought about it, and that's when I went to Chattanooga State.
I got to tell you, electricity scares the heck out of me.
Well, as it should, as it should. But yeah, you just, like anything, you need to understand how it works and, proper safety, and, everything's manageable. So
what was the advantage for you and others who may not have considered it of going to a Chat State and learning a skill like being an electrician?
Yeah.
I guess I bring it kind of full circle back to, it seems we're coming back to that today.
Yeah. Well, part of my classmates were, going to go to UTC and other places. And like most kids at 17, 18 years old, you really don't know what you want to do. And most kids end up picking up some kind of a subject to get started with. And almost all people change their majors as they go. And I didn't feel compelled to really do that. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing electrical work, I enjoyed doing that. And as I looked to say, what could I make doing this? What's reasonable? It was a really good living with excellent benefits, retirement, and so I think a lot of kids these days go off to a school for a 4-year degree, and then when they get out, they still don't know what they want to do. They have completed the requirements and gotten a degree, but having something to apply it to can be a challenge. And I think today's youth are finding that there's a lot of opportunities to go into the trades, pick the craft that you want to pursue, and I think they understand that they can make a really good living with excellent benefits and something that they can be proud of. I mean, I think historically there was always this stigma of a blue-collar construction worker. And, electricians nowadays can make $150,000 plus a year. And, like I say, excellent health benefits and retirement. So
we were talking a little earlier about the Career Construction Academy and the AGC. And I remember a conversation we had with Leslie Gower, who was on the podcast early on. And she made a great point of a lot of kids don't understand what you can accomplish or what you can get with a trade until they come over to the AGC and see all those brand new Ford F-150s there, and they go, "Oh man, maybe I ought to consider that."
Well, I think that's very true, and I think it's really important for our youth to be around positive role models, especially in their age group, because it's kind of like, okay, that makes sense versus seeing somebody now that's my age and they're like, well, I don't know how he got where he got, but it can't happen to me. But it does, and it can.
Well, and that's why we wanted to do this podcast, because you started as one of those young kids who didn't really know where you wanted to go, what you wanted to do, and what it might bring you.
Yeah.
So the 2 years at Chattanooga State, you went through the was it industrial electrical program?
Yeah, industrial electricity.
Electricity. And then where's that lead you?
So, I was doing that, and I was working summers at Ronnie's Electric out in Rossville, and a coworker of mine had left and went to work for Lawson about 6 months earlier. And there was a conversation, I guess, at some point, and he had shared my contact information with him, and a person at Lawson had called me and said, "Hey, would you consider coming over and interviewing with us?" And I was like, "Well, I got a good job. I like where I'm at. But I'm open to a conversation." So I went over and had that conversation, and, they ended up offering me a couple of dollars an hour, which, I was making $8 an hour, and they offered me like $10.50. And they offered me health benefits, which I didn't have as much of an appreciation for at 21 years old as I should have had, but I got them anyway. And so I left and went to Lawson, and I was there to be a residential wireman and wire new homes. And
so what's the training process through there? You've already gone to Ronnie's. Is it an apprenticeship program? Did you go through that when you were at Ronnie's Electric, or was that part of your Lawson training?
So when I went to work for Lawson, Lawson is affiliated with the IBEW, and the IBEW and NECA
That's International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers?
And the National Electrical Contractor Association have a school called the Joint Apprenticeship Training Committee, and it used to be a 5-year program, but they're changing it now to a 4-year program where you go to school 2 nights a week from September to May, and you have to have so many hours in class, and you have to have so many hours on the job training. Based on that, passing all their tests, at the end of that 4 years, you become a licensed journeyman wireman, which gives you the ability to travel anywhere in the United States and work for another union contractor.
Are you doing this simultaneously while you're working for Lawson, so you're working days and doing the class at night, or are you going to the training program exclusively, and are you being paid to do all this?
So I did this in parallel to working, but I'd get up and be at work at 7:30 in the morning and get off at 3:30 in the afternoon. School started at 6 on Tuesday and Thursday, and it was from 6 to 8:45. We were not paid to go to school. We had to pay for our books, but the classroom and instructors were free to us, and it was a very disciplined school that required you to, study and do your work, and you weren't allowed to be late or miss time, and they'd fail you pretty quick if you started that. So
well, and I would imagine in dealing with something like electricity, they're pretty serious about it too, because it's life and death.
Sure.
Yeah. How old were you at this time?
So when I came to Lawson, I was 21.
Oh, you were a kid.
Yeah. Well, I thought I was an adult. I tell the story when I turned 18, I knew I was an adult, and when I turned 21, I thought, well, I'm legal to drink, so I have to be an adult. And finally, about 25, I was sitting at a red light, and I'm thinking, that wasn't the smartest thing I've just done. And here I am, 25 years old, and I'm still not doing the most intelligent thing. So when does all this end? And the answer is we make mistakes until we die. But it's effort that to keep moving forward and trying to do the right things.
So when you went through the Joint Apprenticeship Training Program, you started at 21 and finished up when you were 25, or you got out at 21?
I actually didn't get in immediately. There's a big demand for that class. They usually interview about 600, and they only accept 100.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't apply for it my first year and a half, but I ended up starting in 87, and I graduated in 92.
Do you have to have someone like Lawson Electric sponsor you, or if there's a young person listening to this podcast and they're not really sure what they want to do, can they just kind of apply independently?
They can apply. They can go out to the JTC, which is located on Volunteer Drive on 153 in Bonnie Oaks, and they can make an application there. But they are required to go to work for a contractor because they have to have the on-the-job training as well as the book time. So ideally, that gives you a chance to get in your discipline of work that you're going to be doing, make sure you like it before you get into school. And, you've got to love doing what you're doing, or you're not going to be very good at it.
Right.
Kind of thing. So typically that's how that works.
Did Lawson steer you to it, or did you kind of look and say, you know what, if I'm going to pursue this, I need to take these steps?
A little bit of both. I knew that in order for me to move up and make the kind of money that I wanted to make, that was the path forward. At the time that I went through the 5 years of school, there's set pay scales for each year. And when you finish the previous year's work, you have the grades and the hours, and you get re-rated to the next year, and you do that all the way through your last year. And when you top out, you become a journeyman wireman. As I said earlier, I think when I topped out, journeyman made about $16 an hour.
That's pretty good.
Well, now they make about $35. So been a little time.
Yeah.
But it was from making $10.50 an hour to go to 16 plus.
Yeah, that's 60% increase.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty strong. So you get through the program, you graduate, and you're at Lawson Electric. What happens for you?
I ended up going through like I say, at the time, it was a 5-year school. I graduated at the top of my class over that 5-year period. And I became a superintendent, a foreman for them, and by that time I had merged over and got into the industrial side of the electrical work. And, I was trying to learn how to run bigger jobs, and I had moved into that side, and, I was kind of thinking that I would, go to these larger and larger projects because they're more challenging and more technical, and, I wanted to learn more. So I ended up doing a couple of projects in Dalton, Georgia at some of the carpet mills. And
in the projects at the carpet mills, you guys were installing textile machines. Would that be the specialty?
Well, the most of what that I did at the time was extrusion equipment, where they'd take the resin pellets and they would melt them and turn them into yarn and put them on a bobbin at some point where they'd end up being tufted into a backing and look like carpet looks. So most of what I did was extrusion related and color compounding, which is where they take and make their colors out of the generic resin.
So you're mainly focused on Dalton in that area, in that industry at that time?
At that time, we ended up with a project, lasted about 2.5 years. And, that got me into the 95, 96, finished that project up and ended up over in Trenton, Georgia, doing a plant called Gill Manufacturing. And the gentleman that was the president of Lawson at the time, his name was Joe Farless. Joe was a very intelligent guy, University of Florida graduate, professional electrical engineer. And I had worked for him. He was my direct report. And anyway, I had been out of Dalton for about 9 months, and he called me one day and said, "Hey, do you think we can get work in Dalton?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, I really think it would be a good idea. I said, "I love the work." And I said, "There's a lot of it." And he said, "Well, more specifically, do you think you can get some work down there?" And I thought, well, I don't really know anything about that, but I would certainly give it a try. And he said, "Well, I'm not offering you a job," but he said, "Let me think about that, talk to my partners about it, and I'll get back to you." A couple of weeks passed, and he called me, and he said, "We'd like to set up a meeting with you to come in and sit down and talk to us." So that meeting was set up, come in, sit down, and they said, "Well, we've had a couple of people go down there before and just hadn't really ever made the right contacts and had any luck getting work. What makes you think you can?" And I said, "Well, I met some people when I was there on that 2.5-year project, and they've kind of moved through different companies. Some still there, but
so you still had the relationships too."
Yeah. So I think it's possible. I said, but I don't know anything about selling work or any of that. I mean, I'm just an electrician. One of the previous presidents was sitting in the room. His name's Walt Hodges, and Walt come to Lawson in the 50s and retired in 95. And he's the guy that built the foundation and brought the company to where it is now. And he's like, "Well, Bill, you understand it cost us a lot of money to bring you in the office and you go wander around in Dalton and trying to sell electrical work." And he said, "You really think you can do this?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I think I can. I don't know why I couldn't." And he's like, "Well, it's March and our business year ends on December 31st. And he said, "It's going to cost us a lot of money to pay you to be down there that year. So you ought to have some skin in the game." And I said, "All right, what does that sound like?" And he says, "Well, I'd like to give you a $2 an hour pay cut."
That sounds attractive, doesn't it?
And he kind of sat back in the chair and laughed. And I wasn't quite sure if he was serious. Of course, Walt doesn't joke a whole lot about that. And, he said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "Well," for about 3 seconds. And I said, "I don't have a better offer on the table, and I'm willing to have some skin in the game."
That's a good move.
And he said, "So we'll reconvene this meeting in December. We're going to measure your production between today and then, and we'll make a decision on the next year to see if you're going to move forward." So
Were you intimidated at all with something like that? Because here you are, you've gone through the program at Chat State, you've gone through the apprenticeship, and you're doing basically the work, and all of a sudden you've got some relationships in Dalton, but there's building a structure, and as you said, sales and all those things. Did at some point you go, my goodness, what have I gotten myself into?
It was a little overwhelming. I'm like, well, how does this happen? And internally I was thinking, well, they're going to send me to some kind of project management school and estimating school and all this stuff. And I reached back out to Joe Farless and I said, what does this look like, Joe? And he says, are you done down at Gill Manufacturing? And I said, well, yes, sir, I'm finishing up. I'll finish Friday. And he said, okay, well, Friday's your last day there, and Monday you need to go to Dalton. So Friday I was an electrician, and Monday I was a project manager with no training.
Did y'all have a location in Dalton, or you were just cultivating the Dalton market?
They had rented a little office space. It was about 400 square feet, but they had sent several people down and just hadn't had any luck due to timing mostly. But so I went down there and I unlocked the door and I walked in and it was very empty and it was very quiet. And I didn't have anything to distract myself with, and I was forced to look in the mirror and say,
it's up to you.
Clock's ticking. Something's got to happen.
So what'd you do? You go out and make prospect calls?
I did. I started off calling the people I knew.
Yeah.
And they were like, you're doing what? And they were like, well, good, congratulations. And I said, well, that remains to be seen. But I communicated with them and then also asked them about anybody that they knew and tried to network a little bit. But, headed into December, I think I had gotten a couple little projects and I had made about $36,000 in gross profit.
That's pretty good.
Well, didn't quite cover my costs for being there, but it wasn't a scratch. But I had made a couple of really good meetings and had locked down a couple of really nice projects moving into the following year. So I went back for my meeting with the group, and they're like, well, sounds like you did a little something, but you've got a pretty good year lined up, so we think we're going to let you come back next year. So, once I got started, I had a project that I did with a company here in Chattanooga called Dillard Construction, and Steve Dillard was probably one of the most disciplined people that I know. He's all business, and I was negotiating a project for a plant out here in Tiftonia called Burner Systems, and they had 3 different locations, and they were bringing them all back here and putting them in one facility. So we helped them design the electrical layout and priced it, and of course we had competition, and they set us down in the same room with their competition and said, it's a pretty big job. How are you going to do it? What's your plan? And so we had to talk about that, and then they asked us with us both in the room, how do you plan on executing on this job? Which, Lawson's strength has always been its people. And the fact that it's been around since 1925, it had quite a reputation. So we won the project, and I was able to do that project. It was very successful, and one thing led to another, and we were off to the races.
How important were those relationships you established in Dalton, North Georgia, to the success you had in building that basically book of business?
Well, it was everything, because the people today, when I went into an extrusion plant down there were people driving Heisters, and there were little production managers, and there were different kinds of managers, and there were people working on the lines, and fast forward in time 7 years, and all those people had moved up. So my brain hadn't quite accounted for all the people I know and how they might move up and how that might help me create my business, but it was everything. So,
and I'd imagine you still have a lot of those relationships today.
I do. I used to pride myself on I told one of my new customers, I said, if you'll let me do this job for you, I'll always do your electrical work. And he went, oh, yeah, that's a pretty big statement. He said, how do you know that? And I said, we've got the best people. We do the best work, and we'll do it at a very good price. So why would you need somebody else?
Yeah.
I mean, we're here for you for the long run.
At your young age in building, particularly the Dalton location, did you have mentors who were kind of help guiding you, or were you more of I'll figure it out on my own and go to people when I need advice?
Well, I had people there to help me, but just as the same as it is today, everybody's busy.
Yeah.
So nobody had time to stop and just go side by side and mentor me for a year.
Yeah.
So, I had the luxury of calling and asking questions, and we're going back into the 90s, so
you couldn't text anyone, could you?
Didn't have a cell phone. They were out there too expensive to have. Had a pager.
Yeah.
And it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, because I had to figure it out on my own.
Yeah.
And even though I didn't have somebody sitting there with me telling me what to do, I knew that I had a resource should I need to call. But it also forced me, on the other hand, to think and plan and do that with a process of trying to say, I know how to do electrical work. How would I do this? And so I didn't have any, I could have had a project manager that was lazy and had bad habits, and I could have learned from him and been just like him. But in this sense, it was me. So all the pressure was on me, and I was focused.
Is that something that came natural to you, or you kind of had to learn trial and error? I mean, and what I mean by that is, as you were a kid growing up, were you always kind of a process guy and looked at things practically and how am I going to get this done?
Well, if you ask my mom, she'd probably say something to the opposite. But I love to take things apart and put them together, and mainly just take them apart. But I don't know. I just think it's something that's inside you.
Yeah.
It ended up being a big part of my success.
So you get Dalton going. What happens in Dalton? How big you get it?
Well, so we start off with nobody, and by the end of the first year, I had 2 guys, and I had that large project at Burner Systems start up, and I ended up with about 20 guys on that. Now, that project was in Chattanooga, but in the meantime, I picked up some projects in Dalton, and by the end of the first year, I think I had about my first full year, I think I had around 35 people.
Wow, that's quick growth.
From 96, moving into the early 2000s, I ended up growing that office into about 100 full-time employees, being electricians. I had hired an office assistant and brought a couple of people in from the field, just like I had done myself. I always picked people that were better at things that I wasn't. So if I needed somebody that was controls oriented for automation, I picked the best guy I had, and I brought him in the office, and I said, you're going to handle this. And it would free me up to sell. So I would go sell more, and I would delegate. And then when I reached a point, I'm like, I'm going to start transitioning part of this work to Jim, and I'm going to keep selling. And then I did that with him, and then I brought another person in the office, and I did that with them. Did
sales come naturally to you, or did you have to learn it? Or, did you read sales books, or was it just?
It didn't come natural. When you don't know what you're doing, the best piece of advice you can give yourself is, use your mouth and your ears in proportion and try not to say too much. So I found pretty quickly that I said something I shouldn't have said, or as quickly as I said it, and then it caused me to have to work a little harder. I ended up getting the job, but listening means everything, and understanding where your customer is and his thought process, let him think through it, and then kind of backfill the things that concerns him. But it was an exciting time.
Yeah, it had to be. I mean, just growing a division to 100 employees is big, but I mean, if you did that with your own company, that's huge.
Yeah.
And you were able to do that down in Dalton. So what does that lead to for you? You have all this success in Dalton. What's that mean for your career at Lawson?
So things were going really well. We had branched out and started working basically anywhere our customers would take us. And being in the textiles industry in Dalton, we would travel. Sometimes we went to Australia and put in a couple of machines on two or three different trips. Went to Canada, put a machine in, modified some machines to go to different countries. We've been to Turkey, Dubai, and Belgium. And most of the things that we do to this day is we provide technical assistance on startup. Mm-hmm. So while it might not make sense for us to load 40 electricians and fly them halfway around the world, we find that we could get somebody, the client will get somebody else to do the electrical work, and then our technical group will go in and do the startup to make sure it's going to run when that time comes. So we started doing that, and we started doing some work for the Army Corps of Engineers. We at some of the shipping ports in North Carolina did some security upgrades, which is a lot of fiber optic type things. And we just kept finding ourselves with relationships that would change jobs, would say, you took good care of me there, can you take good care of me here? And, we always said that as long as we could bring value to you wherever it is that we're going, because we obviously can't be as inexpensive as somebody that's mm-hmm. local, but that's part of my job to sell, was to say, you can hire somebody at a cheaper hourly rate, but it's not what you pay for the hourly rate. It's about what you get for the hours of work that you pay for. So I've had clients compete us against other contractors and us not know it. And in the end, they'll come back and they'll say, God, I can't believe you guys cost more, but y'all's workmanship was wonderful. You finished before they did. And I'm like, it's our job to understand that you only have so much money to spend for electrical work. And we want you to get all the electrical work you can get done for that dollar.
I don't think the average person in our area realizes how international a company like Lawson is. Didn't realize you're flying to Turkey to help install a machine or things like that. Mm-hmm. But to your point on the relationships, because you took care of someone over here when they were in the textile business, when they moved into another business, they obviously had your contact information.
Yeah,
and said, you did great work for me.
Well, yeah, and it was very exciting. We worked alongside a lot of machine manufacturers that would sell equipment to these textile plants, and we would wire them, and then they would send their technical people in to start them. And so I learned what they were doing, and then I tried to provide the same services with other clients in different disciplines of the business. So
I want to go back to the sales aspect again, because you really didn't have a sales training. It's something you learned on your own and through relationships. When you're prospecting for new business, how did you prospect for new business? Was it based on the relationships you had and finding out what's going on, or did you just the old-fashioned shoe leather and knock on doors?
A little bit of both. Obviously, it's easier to count on relationships, but sometimes the market will drive certain sectors of the business. When markets are good, they're real good, and others are poor. So they're kind of cyclical, and I ended up trying to, my role was to be consistent mm-hmm. and not have big ups, and big lows. And so I found businesses, got into the feed mill business, which is where they make feed for chickens. And for some reason, that business was always good when everybody else wasn't.
Interesting.
So they supported me, and it kept me right in the middle.
So like the Great Recession in 2008, because you looked and said, and I'm going to give you my what most people would think. Well, recession, housing hurts, electrical's going to hurt. You insulated yourself a bit by targeting things like the feed business then.
True. You have to be looking ahead, and you've got to be looking at every day, what's going on in the world, what's the economy look like, and then you have to say, what's available to me as a project, what's coming up to bid, what potential work can I get that will last 6 months or a year, so that should there be a slowdown, I have enough backlog to bridge that, and I could get across that because, I'm nothing without my employees. So in 2008, I can remember the shows, Good Morning America, whatever, and I remember a show where they panned a camera out and there was a big, huge parking area full of cars, and the guy sat behind me is all of the repossessed cars.
Ooh.
And they're like, the banks have said quit repossessing because we have nowhere to put them, so just let the people keep them for now. And I thought, this is bad and getting worse, and we actually stretched out and had a car dealership called CarMax. It's out in Hamilton Place Mall. It was coming to town, and it was with a general contractor out of Atlanta, which is, I think, where they're based. He reached out, wanted us to price it because he had heard our name. And I worked real hard with him because I seen that project was going to be about 14 months, and I identified it as
had to have it.
Yeah. And I got aggressive on it, and I had to sell him pretty hard, which he'd done a bunch of them, and he was a little bit amused with me because I was young and I was out here making all these promises. And ended up selling the job, and I ended up having to reduce my workforce because I didn't have enough work for everybody, but I kept all of my key players. So in our world, we'll have a journeyman electrician that's the highest paid, and then you have apprentices and helpers that make less. And I disproportionately had more expensive people on that job because I knew I had to maintain that group.
Yeah.
So when I did that, I had a lot of really great people on the job, and we were just knocking it out. I mean, everybody's working hard and doing great quality work, and that guy's like, I can't believe y'all are doing all this. And they're like, and he's like, well, you're behind. And I said, no, we're not behind. And he's like, yeah, you are. And I'm like, well, take me and show me. So he walked out there, and he was like, well, you're not too far behind, but you need to do better. And I said, we're always trying to do better. So, just trying to be positive.
Well, that's an important lesson, though. I mean, the headwinds were really strong in 2008. To be able to say, look, if I'm going to keep my crew together, I got to get some business that's going to last a while. And that enabled you to keep your A-team together.
Yeah, that's exactly what it did. And we lived to fight another day. And we ended up making some money on the job. And for the risk that we had, it was the best decision I made in that time frame.
How does your career progress at this point? Because what I want to go back to is you start out as a journeyman, and all of a sudden you're rising through the company. So where are you at this point?
So I didn't have a title at that point and didn't really care about it, but
I don't get the sense you did care about the title.
No. But I things were starting to come along, and people were like, well, what are you? And I'm like, I'm a project manager, and set it on my card. And I remember calling Joe Farless one day, the president of the company at the time, and I said, Joe, I'm having a problem getting a little bit of traction because people identify whether or not you're a decision maker based on what your title is. And I'm like, what should my title be? And he said, Crawford, you can have any title you want as long as you make money. And he said, you can be the president of the North Georgia operation. And I learned right then I was creating something that probably really didn't exist. And but that's one way I learned about what was tangible, what meant something, and what didn't.
Yeah.
And if I did my job and I sold hard, it didn't matter if I was the floor sweeper. So, things was moving along really good. Our base was coming up. Market got back on track. We started doing laminate floor plants for Shaw Industries, did a huge project with them. And, everything was taking off, and we had tried to create a diverse business with textiles, feed mill, and a couple of good general contractors. So we had a
steady
mix.
flow of projects.
And we had rented a bigger space and built a new office inside of it, had a little warehouse area, and things were going good. And one day, Mr. Farless called me and he said, "Crawford, what do you want?" And I went, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, what do you want?" At Lawson, I mean, what is it that you want? And I stopped and I thought, why is he asking me this question? And I said, well, if I could have anything I want, I'd make what you make. And it got quiet. And he's like, well, I think everybody'd like to do that. There's a lot of hard work comes between there and there. And I said, well, I think I'm carrying my weight. And
good for you.
I said, you asked me what I wanted. That's what I want. So then we got into talking about having to buy stock and what that cost and how long it would normally take. And he's like, that could be like a 7-year deal. And I'm like, I want something sooner. Well, really? He said. I'm like, yeah. I understood the time value of money, and I knew that the sooner I become a partner in the company, the price would be, irrelevant. Right. And he's like, well, I need to talk to my partners, and he did. And then we had a meeting, and I ended up becoming a shareholder in 98, and I became a partner 2 years later in 2000. I worked to continue to expand our Georgia operations, and somewhere around 2013, somebody said, Joe Farless, I'd met him for something, and he's like, you're probably going to be the next president of the company after Ryan. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no, I mean, that doesn't make sense. And he's like, I'm serious. I just kind of dismissed him. And when Joe left, Ryan Crimmins, which is a great guy and took us to a lot of new places and helped us develop. He became president, but about 2014 or 15, Ryan said, my retirement's coming, and are you interested in this job? And I said, not really. And he went, what? And I said, well, I'm in Georgia. I'm in the face of Lawson, and that. Yeah. I don't know that it makes sense. And he's like, well, you need to think about that. And I did. And it came up again, and I turned it down again.
How important are those honest conversations? Because in our conversation right here, I get the impression you're pretty direct and tell people what you're thinking. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, what do you want? And they try and adapt to what they think the other person wants to hear. My sense is those honest conversations have really helped you through your career.
Well, they did. I mean, and honestly, I didn't know. I didn't have an ulterior motive. I wasn't trying to get anywhere. And when I asked, it was like, I need to be just as blunt as I can be because, he asked. I didn't pursue. And I felt like at the time that I was working as hard as anybody. And I knew that my profitability was as high as anybody in the company at this point. Yeah. So why not? I mean, tell me why not.
So what turned you from, I may not be the right guy because I'm in North Georgia, I'm the face. What turned you to say, I might be interested in that?
I think I had to look within and realize that typically I'm the guy that I'm not worried about titles. I'm not worried about that kind of thing. And I'll push people to tell me why it is I really need to do something instead of assuming that I should on my own. And I think a couple of conversations and finally I thought, I've checked all the boxes. I got where I've got on my own. I know how to do it. And while running the business side of the company will be far different, I've never known comfort. All I've ever known is change. And but that change challenges me. It's made me a better person. And so I accepted the role in about 2015, and in 2017 I was voted president and CEO of the company by the shareholders. That's
got to be not just for yourself a great feeling, but here's a company that was founded in 1925. You're coming up on your 100th anniversary, and you literally went through starting at the beginning to leading the company.
Well, yes, but I never thought about it. It never crossed my mind.
And I would also imagine that for a company like that, for people to see that leadership comes from within and they promote from within. That's got to be very good for the morale of the company and other people, let's say someone younger starting today saying, you know what, it is possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a great story to tell. While I was living it, I wasn't paying attention to it. I was just working hard and doing my job. But
and that's a pretty good attitude to have, though.
Yeah.
You know, don't worry about all this ancillary noise. Just do your job.
Mm-hmm. So
good things happen.
I hear that now. I mean, I'll be going through our prefab shop, and somebody will walk up, and it'll be a new employee maybe, and somebody will introduce me, and you know, they'll say, he started here just like you, and now he's the president of the company, and that speaks volumes to the company.
Well, it adds to your reputation as a place that people want to work and grow their careers. One thing, before I get to the last question, tell me a little bit about Dragon Wings. I read a little bit about Dragon Wings, and I'm just fascinated by it.
Well, Dragon Wings is a portable solar array, meaning that it's a device that's about the size of a shipping container. It's not in a shipping container, but it's that size. It's built to that specification so that it can be stacked and transported on an overseas shipping type boat. But it's a device that stores electricity. It'll make 60 kW of 208 volt three-phase power, totally by being charged from solar panels. It's the only one that I'm aware of that is completely self-sufficient, and meaning you take this device, it's around 8 feet wide, 20 feet long, and 8 feet tall. You walk up to the end of it, you push a button, and the walls come out, and it goes from being 8 feet wide to 82 feet wide.
Wow.
And it does it with some scissors that basically when it's expanded out, the top of those wings are covered with flexible solar panels. And they collect the sun like any other solar panel, but they charge a 75 kVA or kW Tesla car battery that's built within the assembly. So you can use this power, you know, during the day while the sun's out. It will charge the battery, and then you can use all the excess power while it's generating it. And then when the sun goes down, you can continue to use the power based off of what's stored in the battery.
Because stored, I know it's still in the not necessarily testing, but the proving phase, and and making sure everything works. But that's got to be a great advantage for not just going into disaster areas, but events.
Yeah, it's ideal for areas when a hurricane comes on shore and it devastates the power grid, a tornado, a war zone, some sort of outdoor event where there's not utilities readily available. You bring this unit out, you set it up. It's quite an interesting piece. And, you know, to be clear, Lawson doesn't own that, but Lawson's prefab shop manufactures them.
So you're in a partnership with?
We are. We're a subcontractor to the Dragon Wings folks out of San Francisco, and we assemble and wire and test these units.
I look forward to seeing more of them.
Yeah, glad to have you out.
Love to. Before I get to my last question, I do want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible, and it's thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. All right, Bill, last question. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Well, there's a lot of ways to spend your life, but I think being disciplined and focused while you're doing what you're doing, and, you know, likewise when you're with your family, you give that equal time. We believe at Lawson that we all have to work to make a living to provide for our families. We have a corporate chaplaincy service within our company that we use to benefit our employees. And I would say that in the end, staying focused on what's important and not listening to all the ancillary noise that's going on around you. Do a good job at what you're doing, and show up and participate.
I think you're a great example of that, and it kind of goes back to not being concerned about titles. You just focus on your job and you're doing it, and good things happen.
Yeah. Well, they don't pay much more, so I mean, I think in the beginning we all worry about it making money, and in the end we're more concerned with our reputation. And
boy, that's true. Having gone through that career arc, and now that I'm in my 60s, you look back and go, that wasn't so important. It's more about the friendships made, the relationships established, and enjoying life.
Well, I've been at Lawson for 39 years, and what I've come to find, contrary to what I thought, all of my friends are my coworkers.
Yeah.
And I've spent the majority of my life at Lawson Electric. So I've made a great career. I've made a lot of friends, and the opportunities really have been endless. So it's been so much fun, and the only disappointment is that you can't do it more.
Yeah.
I mean, I would work another 20 years, but...
well, you're in good shape. You can.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to, but I do want to be associated with Lawson until something changes, because the chances of me taking another fork in the road and ended up somewhere else, there's no way that I would have ever be where I am without this company.
Well, I really appreciate you coming and sharing the story. It's one that I really like, and thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.